So, I finally watched Fury. It was originally released in 2014 and some might argue I'm a bit late for that, but since I'm a historian, I can assure you, I'm not. I only lasted 45 minutes. As such, in this video we particularly look at the US and German tactics of the first major engagement of the movie, when a US tank platoon combined with US infantry attacks a German anti-tank position. To be sure, I also checked with a former Leopard 2 gunner and an infantry combat veteran about these topics. So before I dive into the tactical aspects, I will tell you some positives about the movie. I think in terms of aesthetics, it's really well done. It goes for the grimy, dirty and ugly war look. It pulls no punches, it is no glory but all guts, and those guts are mostly spilled on the ground. Similarly, in terms of vehicles, uniforms and overall historical look, it is excellent as well. Now, I won't be nitpicking about historical details, I will look mainly at basic military tactics and particularly its internal consistency in the movie itself. I will not talk about what I consider minor details with regards to fictional products like a movie or a game, namely the spacing and distances between vehicles. These are generally not historically accurate because you would see not much. For instance, here is information according to a German tank company manual. See the spaces? Yes, about 50 meters between each tank. If you try to get that on a camera, you barely see any tanks. If you want to get your hands on that manual, you can grab a copy and also support this channel. It contains both the German original text and the proper English translation side by side. Anyway, let's get on to it. So let us take a look at the anti-tank scene. It is an attack where a US tank platoon consisting of 4 tanks with the help of US infantry attacks a German anti-tank position, which has 2 PaK 40 75mm guns and a MG42 machine gun, and several soldiers defending it. Note that the German unit was capable of trapping a previous US infantry unit in the field and destroying US half-tracks, trying to help out the infantry. The US objective of this new attack is to pick up those US troops and destroy the German unit. The scene starts around 30 minutes into the movie and takes about 5 minutes. A link to the whole scene is linked in the description if you're interested. Yet we start a bit earlier, namely at the mission briefing. It starts off with the commanding officer noting that he called for 10 tanks, but Brad Pitt only arrived with 4. Then he explains that his men are trapped in a field by machine guns. He sent his tracks in, referring to the half-tracks, which are lightly armored, so safe against small arms fire, but not very much else. Those were taken out by the German anti-tank guns. He then notes the position of 2 German anti-tank guns and possibly a third one. Then they talk about the follow-up mission, which is taking a town. There he mentions that he had 2 observers, noting, I had eyes here, gone, there, gone. From my understanding, this means the Germans were able to take out those observers. So now the actual attack against the German anti-tank position. We see 2 clearly destroyed burning half-tracks. This is important since that means the Germans know the range of these vehicles. The US tanks move across the field, bypass the half-tracks and pick up infantry that's trapped in the field. They move closer to the German position. So the Germans can clearly see the US tanks approaching. They know the ranges since they destroyed vehicles further away before. Additionally, US tanks drive straight forward to the German position. Why is this important? Well, the hardest part in firing at an enemy is estimating the correct range due to the ballistic curve, or leading the target properly in case the target is moving sideways. In our case, the German guns don't have to lead since the US tanks are moving head-on. In terms of range, the ranges should be known particularly since they are now closer than the destroyed half-tracks. Anyway, at one point, a single German machine gun starts opening fire, although most of the US infantry is following the tanks directly and thus is in partial cover. None of the German anti-tank guns is firing. The US tanks engage the German machine gun and eventually destroy it. After the machine gun is destroyed, a German anti-tank gun opens fire. After that one is destroyed, the other German anti-tank gun starts firing and is eventually destroyed as well. Both guns miss their initial shots and second shots. Only one manages to achieve a ricochet on the side of a tank. After the machine gun and 2 anti-tank guns are destroyed, Brad Pitt, who commands the tanks, gives the order to light up the enemy. So all 4 tanks fire all their guns and machine guns. Then the tanks drive so close to the German infantry positions that they almost get hit by a Panzerfaust. Note that at this point the US infantry is still behind the tanks, although all German heavy weapons have been destroyed. Only at the very end the accompanying US infantry is ordered to attack. In short, neither the US nor the German tactics in this engagement make much sense, at least not from the information provided in the movie. Let us start with the US tactics. The 4 US tanks roll up to the known German position that is defended by anti-tank guns. Okay, anti-tank guns are made to destroy tanks, as the name suggests. The closer a tank gets to an anti-tank gun, the higher the probability it gets hit. Additionally, the armor penetration increases as well. I mean, even the Germans in 1943 stated that their heavy tank Tiger should conduct combat at distances above 1000 meters. Of course, in some cases one needs to get closer. So what the US tanks could do is limit the effectiveness of the German by providing suppressive fire. Each tank has a 75mm gun and 4 machine guns. One in the bow, one mounted parallel to the gun, another vertical on the turret, and finally a 50 cal on the turret, just in case. Of course, firing all those guns would limit observation. As such, it would make sense that only 1 or 2 tanks fire and they take turns, etc. There are many variations possible to employ suppressive fire and not lose the ability to observe. Ideally, artillery and or mortar support would have been called in on the positions about the same time. One might argue there might not be artillery around. Fair enough, but at least mortars were present. Those were firing when the tank platoon originally arrived at the rendezvous point. If they were used for something else, a simple line could have provided proper context. Also, after the destruction of the German machine gun, the US infantry could have been used more offensively and the tanks kept back. Why? First, what protects the tank is its armor. The more range between the anti-tank gun and the armor, the better, since it decreases accuracy and with kinetic projectiles, also the penetration capability of the projectile. Second, tanks in comparison to infantry are blind, so infantry can spot enemy targets and report or mark them for engagement. In our case, this could have prevented the Panzerfaust attack, since it can't fire the tank beyond its range. Furthermore, the infantry could have scouted for anti-tank guns as well, attack and or report them to the tanks. Okay, how about the German tactics? Well, I'm not sure, but they might be even worse than the US tactics. First, it makes little sense for the machine gun to open fire alone. Second, it makes also no sense for a single anti-tank gun to open fire alone, which ultimately leads to the second anti-tank gun to open fire alone, because no one else was left. Usually all guns would open fire at once together, particularly in this case because they were not under fire from the US forces yet. Furthermore, they had complete view over the terrain the US troops were moving, since they already pinned US troops there and even destroyed several half-tracks as well. Now some people might argue, of course, the German troops were severely depleted, their training was low, morale was down, so they are uncoordinated in defense and everything else. Generally, I would say yes, because the movie plays in April 1945 and the war officially ended in May 1945. That could be an explanation. The problem is, at the same time, we see the US forces were constantly suffering losses in the movie against German troops. The Germans were quite effective dealing damage to them. The replacement for the bow gunner is trained as a typist. Brad Pitt's platoon is down to 1 out of 5 tanks. The officer wanted 10 tanks, 5 were sent, 1 was lost en route. So the German troops before that engagement are constantly portrayed as a capable enemy. There's more, the officer mentioned that 2 observers were taken out. Particularly about the German unit that is engaged, we know that they pinned the US infantry in the field and that they were able to destroy half-tracks that should help the infantry. This also means the German unit holding that position had already combat experience. The terrain was known, the ranges were known as well. Else they could not have hit those half-tracks that were farther away than the tanks. In other words, the internal logic of this movie does not work out, because we have shown that the Germans are mostly incompetent during that attack, yet before off-screen the same unit was quite effective. Is it impossible? No, but the issue is, it was not only the German tactics that were bad, but also the US tactics. So if none make much sense without explanation, then the writing and or directing is the problem. But I already hear someone pulling his "but for dramatic effect" joker, and I agree that in some cases that joker is valid. For this scene, I see no point for it at all. Because if you just change a few aspects in this scene, it actually makes sense. And is as dramatic as it was, or maybe even more so. Okay, How would I change this scene for the better? The briefing scene could be extended by a few lines, where it should be mentioned why artillery and air support were not an option and or was effective beforehand. Thanks to Andrew for pointing this out. So after the US tanks breach through the hedges and move toward the German position, 2 tanks hold and provide suppressing fire on the German positions. After a while, the moving tanks hold and open fire while the other tanks move up now. Then they change their role after a certain distance. This is bounding fire and move, or fire and maneuver from the US Field Manual 1732 from August 1942. This is a very basic tactic. It is also in German World War II manuals and more modern ones as well. This keeps the German position suppressed. They already know that the US troops are coming, so there's no benefit for the US troops not to fire. Additionally, the US infantry can move more freely. Now, the combat veteran noted to me that this tactic would make more sense if this was a tank attack against an enemy position. But the objective is to pick up the US infantry in the field and advance with it. As such, he notes that the better approach is to keep all tanks moving, but still provide suppressive fire, particularly with the machine guns. So there are many methods to solve this problem. The main point is just driving with steel beasts that are full of machine guns and not firing a single one at the known enemy position makes no sense, particularly not for a commander that is portrayed in the movie as capable and effective. This suppressive fire by US troops would not only make tactical sense, it would also give an explanation of why German fire discipline was poor and why they were badly coordinated. The suppressive fire would greatly increase the pressure on the German troops. Their lack of training and leadership would result in the machine gun open fire early, while the guns don't follow up. At the same time, the initial fire on the German positions would startle the German troops and 1 or 2 anti-tank gun crews might leave their position or open fire prematurely. For instance, after being hit by a burst of machine gun fire. And I wonder if it was written or intended that way, since then the tactical conduct of the German forces would make sense if they were under fire, but they weren't. An interesting point about the infantry clustering behind the tanks. I know a German World War II pamphlet that particularly mentioned the clustering around the tank was a bad idea, since it attracted all the fire and thus got infantry often killed. About this, the combat veteran told me that this clustering is still practiced with some forces nowadays, and it really depends on the training the units received. Overall, he notes, it is a bad idea to hug armored fighting vehicles. Now I will also talk shortly about the introduction scene, because this raised quite a few eyebrows as well. In the introduction scene, you see destroyed tanks, a Panzer IV, and then you see a destroyed German, and then you see a destroyed Panther, and then you see another supposedly destroyed American Sherman. And through this carnage slowly rides a German officer on a horse. Why? I have no idea, because this makes not much sense, but let's assume it makes some sense, and he has a reason to go there. Then he is basically ambushed by Brad Pitt, who jumps from his tank onto the officer and kills him with a knife. So relatively silent. Okay, one could argue that an overconfident or misinformed German officer trots through a former battlefield for whatever reason. The problem comes shortly afterwards, when the tank, which is standing among the other destroyed tanks and could not be identified as operational by an officer trotting next to it, is engaged by artillery fire. Why would you shoot at the tank among other wreckages with artillery, particularly if you don't know if it's there? Unless the German officer had a suicide wish and knew already that this tank will be engaged by artillery fire in a few minutes, but right there beforehand to I don't know what. And this scene is for me similar to the anti-tank gun scene, because it makes little sense at all based on the information that is given to the viewer. It has no internal consistency. If the artillery fire was not there, it would make kinda sense. If the officer was not there, the artillery fire could also make sense. But the combination of both is just mind-boggling. To summarize, for me the movie raises one question: why put so much emphasis on a historically accurate style of portraying war as a really ugly and gruesome affair, and then let the soldiers on both sides act on a tactical level like people without common sense? It seems the historical expertise is mostly in regards to uniforms and equipment, while little to nothing was used on tactics. The biggest irony here is that in many ways tactics changed comparatively little between 1945 and 2014. I get there has to be some trade-off for dramatic effect. For instance, the anti-tank guns not scoring deadly hits. Okay, then make them suppressed or something. That missing makes sense. As Andrew pointed out, if the Germans should be built up as a threat, then it makes little sense to show them as a bunch of buffoons that can't even coordinate their guns opening fire at the same time, while there's no suppressive fire. Thanks to Butja Freimann and Tobias for answering various questions about tactics. Thank you to Andrew for reviewing the script. Thank you for watching and see you next time.